When a flight attendant looks you dead in the eye and decides your skin tone renders your first-class ticket fraudulent, they rarely expect you to hold the key to their entire company's future. The morning sky over Seattle-Tacoma International Airport hung heavy and pale, draped in a thick canopy of damp coastal gray that clung to the sweeping glass walls of the terminal. Below, streams of travelers moved with the hurried, mechanical fatigue typical of early transcontinental flights, rolling hard-shell suitcases across polished floors, while the smell of dark roast coffee drifted through the crowded departure lounges. Dr. Julian Hayes moved through this familiar rush with an unhurried, grounded grace. He wore a dark navy wool suit that had been custom-tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly, though it carried no loud designer logos or flashing symbols of status. In his right hand, he carried a soft, aged leather briefcase whose corners had softened after years of accompanying him to corporate boardrooms, international summits, and executive negotiation tables across the globe. As the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Vantage Analytics, Julian spent his life evaluating patterns that other people ignored. He built his career on recognizing subtle anomalies in operational data, subtle shifts in human behavior, and structural cracks inside massive corporate organizations. Today, however, his trip to Boston was personal and high stakes. Horizon Air, one of the nation's largest commercial carriers, had spent months trying to recruit him to their independent board of directors while simultaneously competing to purchase his firm's revolutionary compliance auditing software. Julian carried a heavily annotated copy of the proposed deal inside his briefcase, though he had deliberately chosen to travel alone, without an entourage, executive assistants, or corporate security detail. He wanted to experience the airline as an ordinary traveler, away from the staged red carpets and choreographed corporate presentations. At Gate B8, the priority boarding call echoed over the loudspeaker for Horizon Air Flight 842. Julian joined the short line designated for first-class and top-tier loyalty members. Directly ahead of him stood Harrison Finch, a tall white businessman wearing a charcoal overcoat who was casually reviewing financial charts on a tablet. Standing at the aircraft door was Chloe Miller, the lead first-class flight attendant. Her golden hair was pinned back in a tight, immaculate bun, and her uniform was pressed without a single wrinkle. The moment Mr. Finch stepped up to the boarding scanner, Chloe's entire face lit up with an effortless, radiant warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice dripping with welcoming familiarity as she took his heavy coat before he could even ask. "It is so lovely to see you back on board with us today. I already have your usual sparkling water waiting at seat 1A. Finch offered a brief, polite nod and stepped into the carpeted cabin, accepting the pampering as a natural birthright. Julian stepped up next. He held his smartphone under the glass scanner, and the digital display flashed a crisp, bright green light, emitting a pleasant double beep that confirmed his reservation. Seat 2D, first class, executive tier. Then came the pause. It was a tiny, 2-second hesitation, but Julian had lived long enough as a black man in high-earning spaces to recognize the exact anatomy of that pause. The warmth drained from Chloe's face so fast it was almost chilling. Her eyes flicked down from the green screen, traveled over Julian's face, lingered on his navy suit, and then dropped to the worn leather briefcase in his hand. She did not smile. She did not welcome him aboard. Instead, her hands remained clasped tightly behind her back, actively blocking the narrow entrance to the aisle. "Sir, are you sure you are in the correct boarding lane?" Chloe asked. Her tone was polished, quiet, and deceptively polite, yet it cut through the space between them like a razor blade. Julian kept his eyes level and calm, pointing toward the glowing scanner display. "My boarding pass just scanned green for seat 2D, he replied evenly. Chloe did not move aside. Instead, she leaned slightly closer to the terminal screen, tapping the glass with a manicured fingernail. "The scanner can occasionally glitch when handling economy upgrades or standby passes," she said, her voice carrying a soft, patronizing edge that seemed designed to make him feel small. "Would you mind opening your full reservation details inside the airline application for me? I need to verify your ticket class before I can allow you into the executive cabin." Behind Julian, the line of passengers slowed down. A suitcase wheel clicked against the metal carpet trim of the jet bridge, and Julian could feel the sudden, uncomfortable weight of quiet stares landing on his back. It was a familiar, insidious form of social pressure, the subtle demand that he comply quietly, hand over extra proof, and smooth over the humiliation just to keep from making a scene. Without raising his voice or displaying a single hint of frustration, Julian unlocked his phone and pulled up the full digital booking. Chloe leaned down, reviewing the screen with an intense, skeptical scrutiny that she had not applied to a single passenger before him. When she saw the confirmed first-class status, her eyes flicked up to his face again, looking for a flaw. "Do you have your physical elite membership card on you as well?" she asked, adding a secondary requirement that was completely absent from any official boarding manual. Julian reached into his jacket pocket, produced a polished black metal card displaying Horizon Air's absolute highest loyalty tier, and held it steady between two fingers. Chloe stared at the black metal card. A tiny, tight twitch appeared at the corner of her mouth, revealing her annoyance at having her suspicion proven wrong. "All right," she said flatly, stepping back just an inch, as if she were granting a personal favor rather than acknowledging a paid ticket. "Second row on the right. Seat 2D. Julian stepped past her into the cabin without saying another word. He did not look back, but as he reached his seat, he heard Chloe greet the white passenger walking in behind him with full, theatrical warmth. "Welcome aboard. So wonderful to have you with us this morning." Julian placed his leather briefcase into the overhead bin, closed the latch with a quiet click, and settled into the dark blue leather seat at 2D. Directly across the aisle in seat 2C sat Evelyn Reed, a silver-haired black woman with an air of quiet, indestructible dignity. She was dressed in an elegant plum-colored sweater, and her sharp, intelligent eyes met Julian's as he sat down. There was no pity in her expression, only a deep, shared understanding. She had been standing at the boarding door right behind him, and she had watched Chloe demand two separate forms of identification for a ticket that the machine had already verified. Evelyn gave Julian a tiny, reassuring nod before returning her attention to the hard copy book in her lap. Julian pulled out his tablet and unlocked his document files. The primary file open on his screen was a draft of the proposed contract between Apex Vantage Analytics and Horizon Air. Under the section titled Service Equity and Operational Compliance, the text promised that Horizon Air delivered consistent, dignified, and premium service to every passenger across every route. Julian read the words twice, letting them sink in as the cabin around him buzzed with pre-flight activity. Chloe moved through the first-class aisle with practiced efficiency. She took Mr. Finch's coat in 1A, hung it carefully in the forward closet, and brought him a chilled glass of sparkling water on a silver coaster. She chatted pleasantly with the couple in row 3, asking about their vacation plans and making sure their seating arrangement was comfortable. But every time her path forced her to pass Julian's row, her eyes glided right over him, treating seat 2D as if it were completely empty. Outside the thick window glass, the ground crew pulled the jet bridge away, and the heavy metal door of Flight 842 sealed shut with a deep pneumatic thud. The twin engines roared to life, a low vibration humming through the floorboards as the aircraft began its long taxi toward the runway. Once the airplane reached its cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign clicked off with a sharp chime, Chloe re-emerged from the forward galley carrying a silver tray laid with warm, rolled cotton towels. She presented a towel to Mr. Finch with a soft smile, offered one to Evelyn in 2C, and then stepped beside Julian's seat. Without a word, without eye contact, and without stopping her momentum, she dropped a damp towel onto Julian's open tray table and immediately turned her back to walk toward row 3. "Pardon me," Julian said, his voice smooth, low, and perfectly controlled. Chloe stopped in her tracks. She turned around slowly, her shoulders tight with an unmistakable posture of irritation, as if responding to a paying customer were an unreasonable imposition on her time. "Yes? I pre-ordered Earl Grey tea with lemon when I completed my booking online," Julian said calmly. Chloe tapped the screen of her handheld crew tablet once, spending less than a second looking at the interface. "I don't see any pre-order request for this seat." she said flatly. We don't have Earl Grey available in the forward galley today. I can offer you tap water or plain black coffee. Julian looked at her steadily. The confirmation email sent to my phone this morning explicitly listed the Earl Grey tea reservation. System glitches happen all the time, sir, Chloe replied, her tone rising slightly so that the passengers in the nearby rows could hear her. We have to work with what is physically loaded on the aircraft. Water or coffee? Water is fine for now, thank you, Julian said, maintaining his absolute composure. He knew that reacting with anger would only give her the excuse she was visibly looking for. Chloe poured a half glass of lukewarm water, set it on his tray table without a coaster, and walked back toward the galley. Less than 5 minutes later, the curtains separating the galley from the cabin rustled open. Chloe walked down the aisle, holding a steaming porcelain cup resting on a delicate saucer. A fresh, thick slice of lemon rested against the rim, and the unmistakable bergamot-infused aroma of hot Earl Grey tea drifted through the cabin air. She stopped at row 3, setting the cup down before a white businessman reading a newspaper. Here is your hot Earl Grey tea with lemon, sir, Chloe said warmly. Please let me know if you need anything else. Julian waited until Chloe turned around to head back toward the front. Excuse me, Miss Miller, he called out quietly. Chloe paused, a flicker of genuine annoyance flashing across her features before she masked it with a tight, artificial smile. Is there another problem, sir? You just told me 2 minutes ago that there was no Earl Grey tea loaded in the forward galley, Julian pointed out, gesturing gently toward row 3. Chloe's expression hardened. Her polite facade thinned, exposing a sharp, defensive edge underneath. I said quantities were limited, sir, she snapped softly, though her voice carried across the quiet cabin. We have to prioritize our route regulars and elite customers who fly this specific corridor every single week. Julian picked up his phone, unlocked his loyalty profile, and held the glowing screen toward her. The screen clearly displayed his top-tier status, along with a flight history showing over 100,000 miles flown on Horizon Air in the past year alone. Chloe glanced at the screen, but her expression did not soften with an apology. Points and miles can be accumulated through credit card promotions and corporate programs, she remarked, her voice dripping with quiet condescension. They don't always reflect true loyalty to our crew. How do you define true loyalty, then? Julian asked softly. I have a service to finish, sir, Chloe said, turning her back on him completely and striding into the galley. Julian sat in the quiet hum of the jet engines. Across the aisle, Evelyn Reed gave him a look of profound, angry sympathy. Julian opened a blank document on his tablet. He did not type emotional complaints or angry insults. Instead, he typed cold, objective timestamps. 08:14 a.m. Boarding pass verified green. Secondary identification demanded. 08:42 a.m. Pre-ordered Earl Grey tea denied. Claimed out of stock. 08:47 a.m. Earl Grey tea served to row 3. Flight attendant cited customer prioritization. He was not going to give her a scene. He was going to give her a record. By midday, Flight 842 was suspended high above the vast, snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. The cabin interior was bathed in the soft, blue ambient lighting of long-haul travel, and the comforting, rich aromas of pan-seared meats, roasted garlic, and buttered vegetables began to drift out from the forward galley. Chloe pushed the heavy, polished metal catering cart out into the first-class aisle, her demeanor once again transformed into a picture of high-end hospitality. Mr. Finch, she announced pleasantly at seat 1A, lifting a silver cloche with a dramatic flair. I have your braised short ribs with root vegetables today. Harrison Finch leaned over his tray table, looked down at the steaming plate of beef, and immediately let out a heavy, dissatisfied sigh. I didn't order beef, Chloe. I distinctly remember checking the box for the herb-glazed salmon when I booked this flight. Chloe checked her crew tablet, her brow furrowing slightly. The system manifest lists the short ribs for seat 1A. Mr. Finch, I'm so sorry. Well, the system is wrong, Finch said, his tone carrying the casually demanding entitlement of a man who was used to having every small inconvenience fixed instantly. "I don't want heavy beef right now. I want the salmon. Can't you just swap it out with one from the cart?" Chloe hesitated for a brief second. Her eyes dropped to the top drawer of the catering cart. Sitting on the upper rack was a hot, freshly plated dish of herb-glazed salmon resting beside a small porcelain bowl of wild rice. Affixed to the corner of the black tray was a bright white caterer's label that clearly read, "Hayes, Dr. J. Seat 2D Special Meal. Herb, glazed salmon." Julian watched the exchange from his seat in the second row. He had reserved that exact salmon meal 3 weeks in advance to accommodate his dietary preferences. He saw Chloe's hand hover over the labeled tray. She looked from the label to Mr. Finch's expectant face, and then her eyes flicked back towards seat 2D, meeting Julian's calm gaze for a fraction of a second. Instead of explaining to Mr. Finch that the salmon was a reserved special order for another passenger, Chloe maneuvered the catering cart slightly, angling the heavy metal body so that it partially blocked Julian's direct line of sight. She stepped into the narrow space between the cart and the galley curtain, thinking she was completely hidden from view. What she did not realize was that the dark, tinted glass of the window beside seat 2D created a sharp, mirror-like reflection. Furthermore, 2 rows behind Julian in seat 3F sat Tyler Cross, a 32-year-old freelance documentary editor who had been using his high-definition camera to film a time-lapse video of the clouds passing over the wing. When Tyler noticed the tense body language of the crew, he subtly shifted the angle of his lens, catching the reflection in the polished chrome galley trim directly on 4K video. Through the clear reflection, Julian and Tyler watched as Chloe reached out with her manicured fingers. She grabbed the corner of the white catering sticker on the salmon tray, peeled the adhesive label off the plastic wrapper, and crumpled the small piece of paper tightly inside her palm. She then slid the freshly unlabeled salmon tray out of the drawer, set it onto a clean china plate, and presented it to Harrison Finch with a sweet, triumphant smile. "Here you go, Mr. Finch," Chloe said softly. "I took care of that for you. Fresh, herb-glazed salmon." "Thank you, Chloe," Finch said, picking up his fork without a second thought. "Now that is what I call real customer service." Julian sat in absolute silence, watching the blatant theft unfold before his eyes. He did not shout. He did not jump out of his seat. He simply watched as Chloe smoothed down her apron, pushed the cart 2 feet forward, and stopped directly beside seat 2D. "I am so sorry, sir," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a rehearsed, flat tone that lacked even a trace of genuine empathy. "I'm afraid we are completely out of the salmon option today. The airline undercatered the flight, so I only have the braised beef remaining." Julian looked directly into her eyes, his voice steady and icy calm. "That is interesting. Considering I spent 3 weeks watching my confirmed reservation for the herb-glazed salmon sit on my account dashboard, and I just watched you peel my name label off that tray 2 minutes ago to give it to the passenger in 1A. Chloe's posture stiffened instantly. The color flushed in her neck, but her eyes snapped with an aggressive, defensive glare. "I don't know goods you think you saw." "Good, sir. But catering labels are regularly adjusted for crew management purposes. There was an allocation error on the ground. An allocation error that conveniently stripped the meal reserved for seat 2D and handed it to seat 1A?" Julian asked softly. Chloe leaned down slightly, lowering her voice so that it sounded like a private reprimand. "Mr. Finch is a multi-million-mile executive customer who flies this route every week," she whispered sharply. "Sometimes in first class, we have to exercise operational flexibility to take care of our core patrons. You need to understand how these cabin dynamics work, instead of making false accusations. So flexibility requires taking something I paid for and giving it to someone else because you decided his presence matters more than mine?" Julian asked. Chloe pulled herself up to her full height, her chin jutting out with stubborn arrogance. "I am offering you the beef, sir. Take it or leave it. I have other passengers to serve." "I will pass on the beef," Julian said evenly. "Fine," Chloe spat out, turning the cart around with a sharp, noisy jerk and marching back toward the galley without offering him a roll, a salad, or a glass of water. Across the aisle, Evelyn Reed watched Chloe's retreating back with pure, unadulterated disgust. "That woman has completely lost her mind," Evelyn whispered across the aisle, her voice trembling with quiet indignation. "I saw her peel that sticker off with my own eyes." "I know," Julian said quietly, unlocking his tablet and adding another precise timestamp to his document. "I saw it too." Inside the forward galley, Chloe stood behind the heavy blue curtain, her breathing shallow and fast. She knew she had crossed a line, but her pride refused to allow her to step back or apologize to the black man sitting in seat 2D. To her, admitting a mistake to him felt like an unacceptable defeat. She needed to put something on his tray table, anything that would allow her to report to her supervisor that she had fulfilled her basic duty to offer a meal service. She opened the lower storage lockers beneath the galley counter, searching through the standard backup supplies, but found only empty plastic crates. Then, her eyes fell upon a heavy, insulated red catering tote resting in the far back corner of the lower compartment. Taped across the zipper of the red tote was a bright, neon orange warning strip stamped with bold black lettering. "Security hold do not serve. Refrigeration excursion facility." B. This tote contained perishable catering items that had been flagged at the Seattle airport facility earlier that morning after sitting in a broken cooling unit for over 5 hours. The entire batch had been ordered destroyed, but the ground crew had accidentally loaded the bag onto Flight 842, sealing it with the warning strip, so the flight crew would dispose of it upon landing in Boston. Chloe looked at the neon orange warning strip. She looked toward the blue curtain separating her from the cabin. Without pausing to consider the health risks, she reached down, ripped the orange warning seal off the zipper, and threw it into the trash bin. She unzipped the insulated bag, pulled out a tightly wrapped turkey and cheddar sandwich encased in thick, clear plastic, and zipped the bag back up. She stepped through the curtain and walked down the aisle, her shoes making hard, aggressive thuds against the carpet. She stopped at seat 2D, reached out, and dropped the cold, plastic-wrapped sandwich onto Julian's bare tray table. The heavy item landed with a flat, lifeless thud that echoed through the quiet cabin. "This is the only remaining alternative option on the aircraft," Chloe said coldly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Julian looked down at the plastic wrapper. There was no porcelain plate, no cloth napkin, no silverware, and no side dish. It was a cheap, gas station quality sandwich, dropped unceremoniously onto an executive tray table. He reached out and carefully peeled back the tight plastic packaging. The moment the seal broke, a sharp, sour, fermented stench bloomed into the air. It was not the mild smell of cold deli meat. It was the overpowering, unmistakable odor of rotting poultry and spoiled dairy. Evelyn Reed instantly recoiled in seat 2C, covering her nose with her sweater sleeve. "Good Lord! What is that smell?" she exclaimed. Julian picked up the top slice of white bread by its corner. Beneath the wilted, slimy lettuce lay a massive, furry patch of grayish-green mold, spreading across the turkey meat and eating into the damp bread underneath. Spots of dark blue fungus were clearly visible along the crust edges. Julian sat perfectly still for 5 full seconds. He had expected passive-aggressive neglect. He had expected rude service and subtle insults. But being served an item covered in toxic mold from a compromised catering bag crossed from petty bias into dangerous corporate negligence, he pressed the attendant call button above his head. The chime rang clearly through the cabin. Chloe walked back down the aisle, her eyes rolling with exaggerated fatigue. "What now?" she asked, refusing to lower her voice. Julian did not shout. He did not use profanity. He simply tilted his tray table slightly toward her, illuminating the rotting food under the bright reading light above. "Please look at this sandwich, Miss Miller," Julian said softly. Chloe glanced down at the green mold, but her expression did not show a single drop of shock, horror, or remorse. Instead, her eyes narrowed with defensive hostility. "I don't see what the big deal is," she said, her voice dripping with artificial indifference. "It's just a little discolored from the cold storage. If you're going to be this picky and difficult about everything I bring you, you don't have to eat it. You served me food taken from an insulated bag marked with a red temperature hold warning," Julian said, his voice dropping into a deep, authoritative register that made nearby passengers turn their heads. You took away my pre-ordered meal, handed it to another passenger, and then brought me a rotting sandwich covered in visible mold. Chloe's face flushed bright red with fury. There was no warning tag on that bag, she snapped, her voice rising to a sharp scream. You are making up wild stories because you didn't get your way. You have been rude, demanding, and hostile to me since the second you stepped onto this plane. You are turning a simple, routine meal adjustment into a massive scene. I have not raised my voice once, Miss Miller, Julian replied with terrifying calm, but I am going to document this. Julian pulled out his phone, set it to high-resolution camera mode, and took 4 clear, crisp photographs of the moldy sandwich, capturing the green spores, the torn plastic wrapper, and the distinct sticky residue left on the side where the warning label had been ripped away. Chloe's eyes went wide with panic when she heard the camera shutter click. "Put that phone away right now," she yelled, reaching her hand out as if to snatch the device from his fingers. "You are not allowed to take photographs inside this aircraft. It is a federal security violation to photograph flight crew." "I am photographing the toxic food you dropped on my tray table," Julian said smoothly, pulling his phone back out of her reach. From across the aisle, Evelyn Reed reached into her handbag and pulled out a fresh, clear, zip-top plastic pouch that she used for holding her travel medications. She handed it across the aisle to Julian. "Use this, son," she said loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Don't let her throw that evidence away." "Thank you," Julian said. He carefully picked up the wrapped sandwich by its edges, placed it inside the clear document pouch, and zipped the seal tight, preserving the moldy food in a pristine, airtight container. Behind him in seat 3F, Tyler Cross held his camera high, recording every single second of the interaction in crystal-clear, high-definition video. "You think you're being so smart, don't you?" Chloe sneered, her voice shaking with unhinged rage. "Just wait until we land. We'll see how smart you feel when the authorities meet this plane." She turned on her heel and sprinted back toward the galley to find her supervisor. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy galley curtain was pushed aside, and Gavin Ross, the cabin crew supervisor, strode down the aisle. Gavin was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, wearing a dark navy supervisor's vest and carrying a digital service tablet tucked tightly under his arm. His face was set in a rigid, aggressive mask, the expression of a manager who had already decided who was guilty before hearing a single word of explanation. Chloe followed half a step behind him, her hands folded submissively, playing the role of a terrified, victimized flight attendant to perfection. "Sir, I am Gavin Ross, the lead supervisor on this flight," Gavin announced, stopping beside seat 2D and leaning over Julian's space to establish physical dominance. "I have been informed that you are harassing my crew, causing a major disruption in the cabin, and taking unauthorized photographs of airline staff." Julian looked up at Gavin with an expression of absolute, immovable composure. "Good afternoon, Mr. Ross. I have not harassed anyone, nor have I taken photographs of your crew. I have, however, preserved a piece of spoiled, toxic food that was served to me after my pre-ordered meal was given away." Julian gestured to the clear, sealed plastic pouch sitting on his tray table, displaying the thick patches of green mold clearly visible through the plastic. Gavin glanced at the pouch for a split second, but he didn't examine it. Instead, his eyes locked onto Julian's phone resting beside his tablet, and then flicked back to Tyler Cross, in row 3, who was quietly continuing to record the scene. "I don't care about your meal dispute right now, sir," Gavin said, his voice hardening into an aggressive bark. "Airline policy strictly prohibits passengers from recording crew members or collecting physical items from the catering service without authorization. You need to unlock your phone right now, delete those photographs in front of me, and hand over that plastic bag so I can dispose of it properly." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained smooth and unflappable. "Under federal aviation regulations and passenger rights guidelines, I am fully within my rights to document the physical condition of items provided to me on a commercial flight, provided I do not interfere with safety operations. I am seated, my seatbelt is fastened, and I am speaking to you at a normal conversational volume. I will not delete my photographs, and I will not surrender this physical evidence." Gavin's face flushed with anger. He stepped closer, reaching his hand directly toward the clear pouch on Julian's tray. "I am giving you a direct crew instruction, sir. Hand over that bag." Before Gavin's fingers could touch the plastic, Evelyn Reed reached across the aisle, with surprising speed, picked up the sealed pouch, and slid it into her own deep leather handbag, zipping it shut with a sharp zip. "Don't you dare touch that evidence, young man," Evelyn said, her voice ringing out with the crisp, absolute authority of a retired school principal who had managed rebellious teenagers for 40 years. "I am a neutral witness, sitting in seat 2C. I am holding this evidence for the proper authorities when this aircraft touches the ground. If you want to lay a hand on my personal handbag, you had better be prepared for the legal consequences of assaulting a senior citizen." Gavin froze, his hand hovering in midair. He looked from Evelyn's sharp, fearless glare to Julian's unreadable, stoic expression. Meanwhile, in seat 1A, Harrison Finch had been listening to every single word of the confrontation. He looked down at the half-eaten plate of herb-glazed salmon resting on his tray table. He reached out with his thumb and rubbed the side of the black plastic tray, feeling the sticky, tacky residue where Julian's name label had been hastily ripped off just an hour earlier. A sudden, overwhelming wave of profound mortification washed over Finch. He realized that he had allowed his own casual entitlement to be weaponized by a biased flight attendant. He realized that he was eating food that had been stolen from the quiet, dignified black man sitting behind him. Finch slowly set his fork down. He pushed the salmon plate away from him, as if it were coated in poison. He buried his face in his hands, completely unable to look Julian or Evelyn in the eye. Gavin Ross realized he was rapidly losing control of the cabin atmosphere. Several passengers in rows 3, 4, and 5 were now sitting up, watching the interaction with open disapproval. "I am going to give you one final chance to comply," Mr. Ross told Julian, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "If you continue to refuse my instructions, I will be forced to notify the cockpit that we have an unruly, non-compliant passenger in first class." "You do whatever you feel is operationally necessary, Mr. Ross," Julian replied softly. "But I will not erase the truth to make your job easier." Gavin turned around, grabbed Chloe by the arm, and marched into the forward galley. He picked up the interphone connected directly to the flight deck. "Captain," Gavin said into the receiver, his voice tight and deceptive, "we have an escalating security situation in first class. Seat 2D is being aggressively non-compliant, refusing direct crew instructions, filming staff, and making the crew feel physically threatened. We need security to meet this aircraft the moment we touch down in Boston." While Flight 842 surged through the thin air at 35,000 feet, the battle was no longer limited to the airplane cabin. Julian unlocked his tablet, connected to the aircraft's satellite Wi-Fi network, and opened an encrypted messaging application. He composed a direct, highly detailed message to Tasha Robinson, his brilliant chief of staff stationed at Apex Vantage Analytics headquarters. "Tasha," Julian typed with surgical precision. "Flight 842 to Boston. I am currently experiencing an acute operational incident involving first-class crew members Chloe Miller and Gavin Ross. I was served toxic, spoiled food from a restricted catering tote after my pre-ordered meal was reassigned. Crew is currently constructing a false, unruly passenger narrative to cover their liability. I require immediate data preservation, not public intervention. Lockdown catering manifests, temperature logs for Seattle Facility B, and crew incident filings for Flight 842 immediately." On the ground in Boston, Tasha Robinson's phone buzzed. She read the text message twice, her eyes turning to ice. She had worked alongside Dr. Julian Hayes for nearly a decade. She knew that Julian never panicked, never exaggerated, and never called for help unless a structural boundary had been severely breached. Tasha did not waste time calling customer service lines. Instead, she opened her executive contact directory and placed a direct, high-priority call to Sophia Lynn, the Vice President of Passenger Experience and Operational Compliance at Horizon Air Corporate Headquarters. Sophia Lynn was sitting in her corner office in Boston when her private line rang. Sophia was a formidable, sharp-minded executive who had spent 20 years rebuilding operational integrity inside commercial aviation. "Sophia," Tasha said, skipping the pleasantries. "Dr. Julian Hayes is currently on board Flight 842 from Seattle. He is sitting in Seat 2D. Your first-class cabin crew has served him rotting, moldy food from a flagged refrigeration failure bag, stolen his pre-ordered meal to give to another passenger, and is currently filing a fraudulent, unruly passenger report to cover up their actions." Sophia Lynn sat up straight, her hand freezing over her desk pen. "Wait, Dr. Julian Hayes?" As in the CEO of Apex Vantage Analytics, who is scheduled to meet with our executive board tomorrow morning to review our multi-million-dollar compliance contract? "The very same," Tasha replied coolly. "I am transmitting time-stamped photographs of the toxic food, clear audio notes, passenger witness statements, and 4K video recordings captured by another traveler directly to your secure portal right now. I suggest you look at them before your flight crew makes a catastrophic mistake upon landing." Sophia opened the secure file transfer on her desktop. Within seconds, high-definition photographs of the green, moldy sandwich appeared on her dual monitors, followed by Tyler Cross's crisp video showing Chloe peeling Julian's name label off the salmon tray. Sophia felt a sickening wave of horror crash over her. This was not a minor customer complaint about a cold cup of coffee. This was a blatant, malicious breach of food safety protocols, combined with gross professional misconduct and fabricated security reporting. Sophia immediately picked up her phone and dialed Horizon Air's internal compliance database. She initiated an emergency deep file audit of Chloe Miller and Gavin Ross, pulling their complete 1-4-month employment records. What the automated system revealed sent a chill through Sophia's spine. Over the past 14 months, 4 separate formal complaints had been filed against Chloe Miller by black passengers flying in premium cabins. Every single complaint described the exact same pattern: questioning boarding pass legitimacy, denying pre-ordered beverages, reassigning premium meals to white passengers, and describing the black passengers' polite objections as attitude problems or aggressive behavior. Even worse, every single one of those 4 complaints had been reviewed and closed by Supervisor Gavin Ross, who had stamped them as insufficient evidence and issued small 5,000-mile loyalty vouchers to bury the files permanently. It was a routine, deep-rooted mechanism of cover-up operating right under corporate leadership's nose. Meanwhile, high above the clouds, the heavy wooden door of the flight deck opened. Captain Thomas Wright stepped out into the first-class cabin. Wright was a 54-year-old veteran pilot, with silvering hair at his temples and 4 golden bars gleaming on his epaulets. He walked with the heavy, unyielding authority of a man who was used to having his command accepted without question. Wright stopped at Seat 2D, flanked by Gavin Ross and Chloe Miller. "Mr. Hayes," Captain Wright said, his voice deep, booming, and stern. "I am the captain of this aircraft. My crew has reported that you are creating a major operational hazard, refusing safety instructions and filming staff. On this plane, my crew's authority is absolute. I have authorized a formal unruly passenger report, and I have requested local law enforcement to meet this aircraft at the gate in Boston. You may face federal charges and a permanent ban from Horizon Air." Julian looked up at the captain. His face remained calm, his hands resting naturally on his armrests. "Captain Wright," Julian said softly, his voice cutting through the heavy air with profound weight. "Authority is a tool designed to maintain safety, not a shield to protect your crew from the truth. You have authorized an arrest report without inspecting the spoiled food sitting across the aisle, without reviewing the video footage recorded by fellow passengers, and without asking me a single question. You are substituting your crew's lies for reality." Captain Wright's jaw tightened. He looked at Julian's calm, fearless eyes, feeling a sudden, momentary flicker of doubt deep in his chest. But his institutional pride quickly took over. "The report is signed, Mr. Hayes," Wright said coldly. "We land in 20 minutes. Prepare yourself for airport police." Wright turned and walked back into the cockpit, closing the heavy door behind him with a loud, mechanical lock. Julian did not flinch. He looked out the window as the plane began its long descent into Boston, knowing that the trap had been set not for him, but for the people who thought their authority made them invisible. Flight 842 broke through the dense cloud layer over Massachusetts, its landing gear dropping with a heavy mechanical clunk that echoed through the airframe. The smooth tires touched down on the tarmac at Logan International Airport with a sharp screech, the thrust reversers roaring as the aircraft slowed down and taxied smoothly toward Gate B12. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. Nobody in first class moved to gather their personal belongings. Nobody reached for their overhead bags. Chloe Miller stood in the forward galley, her hands resting on her hips, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Gavin Ross stood beside her, holding his tablet, waiting to hand Julian over to the police officers he assumed were waiting outside the jet bridge. They truly believed that institutional power was about to do what it had always done, crush the person who dared to document their wrongdoing. The aircraft pulled up to the gate, and the jet bridge attached to the fuselage with a dull thud. Captain Wright opened the cockpit door, stepping out into the forward cabin to personally oversee the arrest of the unruly passenger. "All right, everyone remain seated," Gavin announced loudly to the cabin. "Police officers will be boarding first to clear a security matter." The heavy main cabin door unsealed and swung outward. Chloe stepped forward, expecting to see uniformed state troopers with handcuffs ready. Instead, the first person to step across the threshold was Vice President Sophia Lynn. She was wearing a sharp, dark charcoal business suit, carrying an official corporate tablet, and accompanied by Dr. Eris Thorne, Horizon Air's chief food safety specialist, who carried a silver metal case containing tamper-evident evidence bags and testing equipment. Behind them stood two uniformed airport police officers, but they remained standing outside in the jet bridge, under strict, explicit orders from Sophia Lynn not to enter the aircraft or place anyone in restraints. Chloe's smirk vanished instantly, her face drained of color. "Vice President Lynn?" she stammered, taking an instinctive step backward. What are you doing here?" Gavin Ross's eyes went wide with sudden, sickening terror. He knew Sophia Lynn. He knew she only appeared in person when a major structural crisis had hit the airline. Captain Wright stepped forward, looking confused. "Vice President Lynn, I issued an unruly passenger report for the individual in seat 2D. My crew reported—" "Captain Wright, hold your tongue," Sophia Lynn interrupted, her voice dropping like an iron gavel in a quiet courtroom. Her tone was so cold, so terrifyingly sharp, that the entire cabin went dead silent. Sophia looked past the crew, her eyes scanning the cabin, until they landed on seat 2D. "Dr. Hayes," she said softly, stepping down the aisle. "On behalf of Horizon Air corporate leadership, I apologize for the circumstances awaiting you upon arrival." She turned to the police officers standing in the doorway. "Officers, thank you for your readiness, but there is no unruly passenger on this aircraft. You may step back." The officers nodded, saluted quietly, and backed out into the terminal. Gavin Ross felt his knees go weak. Chloe gripped the edge of the galley counter to keep from swaying. Sophia turned her full attention to the cabin. "I am suspending the unruly passenger report immediately," she announced clearly, her voice echoing into every corner of first class. "We are conducting an emergency, on-site operational audit of Flight 842. Sophia Lynn gestured to Dr. Thorne, the food safety specialist. Dr. Thorne stepped down the aisle, opening his silver kit. Evelyn Reed reached into her leather handbag, pulled out the clear, airtight pouch containing the moldy sandwich, and handed it directly to Dr. Thorne. "Here is the physical evidence, ma'am," Evelyn said proudly. "It has been sealed and untouched since it was served." Dr. Thorne unsealed the outer pouch, took a high-resolution photograph of the thick green fungus, and placed a chemical sensor probe inside the wrapper. The digital readout on his meter instantly flashed bright red. This food product shows severe bacterial contamination and advanced fungal decay, Dr. Thorne declared loudly. Furthermore, the wrapper carries the serial number from Catering Facility B's restricted temperature hold batch. This item was explicitly flagged as toxic and ordered destroyed at 6 o'clock this morning. It should never have been anywhere near an active flight. Sophia Lynn's eyes burned with quiet, incandescent fury. She turned to Chloe. "Miss Miller, why was a toxic, flagged food item from a restricted bag served to a passenger in first class?" I didn't know," Chloe stammered, her voice high-pitched and hyperventilating. "The bag was in the lower locker. I thought it was just extra stock." "You broke a neon orange security hold seal to open that bag, Miss Miller," Sophia said, lifting her tablet screen. "We have the inventory log showing the exact minute you opened that compartment." Sophia then turned to Tyler Cross in seat 3F. "Mr. Cross, may we view the video recording you captured?" Tyler handed his phone to Sophia. Sophia pressed play. The high-definition 4K video played loudly in the quiet cabin. Everyone watched in absolute horror as the video clearly showed Chloe reaching onto the cart, peeling the white label marked Hayes, Dr.J. off the herb-glazed salmon tray, crumpling it in her hand, and handing the meal to Harrison Finch in 1A. The video then showed her pulling the moldy sandwich out of the restricted bag and dropping it onto Julian's table. Throughout the entire video, Julian remained completely seated, soft-spoken, and perfectly composed. He never raised his voice, never made a threatening gesture, and never stood up. Sophia turned to Gavin Ross, her voice lethal in its calm precision. "Supervisor Ross, your official security report submitted to Captain Wright claimed that the passenger in seat 2D was standing in the aisle, screaming, blocking service, and making crew feel physically threatened. Care to explain why your written report is a complete fabrication?" Gavin's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked down at the carpet, his face pale as paper. I relied on Miss Miller's account," he whispered pathetically. "You are the supervisor on this aircraft, Gavin," Sophia said coldly. "You attempted to confiscate physical evidence, you ignored passenger witnesses, and you helped write a fraudulent report to cover up a critical health hazard and gross misconduct." Sophia turned to Captain Wright. "And you, Captain, signed a federal security document authorizing the arrest of a passenger without taking 30 seconds to look at the food or ask a single question." Captain Wright looked at the glowing tablet screen, showing the video of Julian sitting calmly in his seat. The veteran pilot's face flushed with deep, overwhelming shame. He realized he had allowed his uniform and authority to be used as a blunt instrument to protect a lie. I made a terrible error in judgment," Captain Wright admitted quietly, his voice hollow. Crucially, throughout this entire confrontation, Julian's corporate title had not been mentioned once. Sophia Lynn had not brought up his CEO status or his board appointment. The crew was being completely dismantled and held accountable purely because the physical facts, the scientific evidence, and the video documentation proved their guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. Justice was being served not because a powerful man was sitting in seat 2D, but because a human being's dignity had been defended by the truth. "Miss Miller, Mr. Ross, Captain Wright," Sophia announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are all removed from flight duty, effective immediately. Your badges are deactivated. You will remain on this aircraft until corporate compliance officers escort you to headquarters." The following morning at 9 o'clock, the sun broke through the Boston clouds, casting long beams of light through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Horizon Air's global headquarters. Inside the executive boardroom, 11 members of the board of directors sat around a massive, polished mahogany table. They were sipping hot coffee, reviewing financial reports, and chatting casually. At the head of the table sat Arthur Vance, the chairman of Horizon Air. Arthur cleared his throat and tapped his pen against his glass. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin our formal vote on the acquisition of Apex Vantage Analytics compliance platform, I want to address a minor operational hiccup that occurred yesterday afternoon on Flight 842 from Seattle. It appears there was a brief, unfortunate service dispute between a passenger and our cabin crew that resulted in a temporary security escalation. The matter has been contained internally, and the heavy glass boardroom doors swung open. Dr. Julian Hayes walked into the room. He wore the exact same navy wool suit he had worn on the plane, carrying his worn leather briefcase. He walked with a steady, commanding presence that commanded the immediate attention of every executive in the room. Arthur Vance's mouth dropped open. "Julian!" he exclaimed, rising from his chair with a nervous artificial smile. "Welcome. We were just about to introduce you to the board as our newly appointed independent director and the CEO of Apex Vantage." The senior operations executives sitting at the far end of the table, the very men who had received Gavin Ross's initial unruly passenger email hours earlier, went completely white. Their eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing horror as they realized that the man they had attempted to flag, ban, and arrest on flight 842 was the same visionary leader they were paying millions to save their company. Julian did not smile. He did not offer handshakes. He walked slowly to the center of the mahogany table. Unzipping his leather briefcase, he reached inside and placed 4 specific items onto the polished wood, arranging them in a neat, deliberate line directly in front of the chairman. First, the certified laboratory chemical report, confirming toxic fungal contamination on the turkey sandwich. Second, a USB flash drive containing Tyler Cross's pristine 4K video showing the meal label theft. Third, the fraudulent, signed, unruly passenger report authored by Gavin Ross and Captain Wright. And fourth, a printed compilation binder showing 4 prior complaints from black passengers that had been systematically buried by cabin management over the past 14 months. The boardroom went so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. Arthur Vance looked down at the items, then looked up at Julian, his forehead sweating. "Julian? What? What is this?" "This is the reality of your corporate culture, Arthur," Julian said. His voice was low, rich, and filled with an undeniable, commanding power that shook the room. "Yesterday, I boarded Horizon Air Flight 842 as an ordinary passenger. During that flight, your lead flight attendant questioned my right to sit in first class, denied my pre-ordered beverage, stole my reserved meal to give to a white passenger, and served me food taken from a restricted, toxic catering bag." Several board members gasped softly, looking in horror at the photographs of the green, moldy sandwich attached to the lab report. "When I politely documented this health violation," Julian continued, "your cabin supervisor and your senior captain attempted to confiscate my evidence, threatened me with federal arrest, and filed a fraudulent security report designed to destroy my reputation and hide their own liability." Julian leaned forward, resting his palms flat on the mahogany table, looking directly into the eyes of every executive present. "You spent the last 6 months convincing me that Horizon Air values integrity, equality, and top-tier service," Julian said, his words landing like heavy hammer blows. "You tried to buy my company's compliance software to fix your public image. But your technology isn't broken, gentlemen. Your culture is. You have created an environment where staff believe they can strip a passenger of his dignity simply because of the color of his skin, and then use the cover of flight safety to erase the evidence." Arthur Vance buried his hands in his face, completely speechless. The operations executives looked down at their laps, unable to speak a single word of defense. "I am not presenting these items today to seek personal vengeance," Julian said softly. "If I wanted vengeance, I would have handed this video to the national news networks yesterday afternoon. I am standing here because I refuse to allow this airline to continue sweeping human humiliation under the rug with travel vouchers and empty corporate apologies." Julian pulled out a single sheet of paper from his briefcase and set it on the table. "Here are my conditions for remaining on this board and finalizing our corporate partnership," Julian declared. "First, flight attendant Chloe Miller is to be terminated immediately for gross negligence, racial bias, and falsifying official records. Second, Supervisor Gavin Ross is to be permanently stripped of supervisory authority and demoted to a non-management ground position. Third, Captain Thomas Wright is to undergo mandatory human factors retraining and a formal command review. And fourth, Horizon Air will immediately reopen every single one of the buried customer complaints from the past 2 years, submit them to an independent human rights audit panel, and install digital, tamper-evident seals on every catering shipment across your fleet." Arthur Vance looked up, his eyes filled with profound respect and immense relief that Julian was offering them a path toward redemption rather than total destruction. "Julian," Arthur said, his voice trembling with emotion, Every single one of your conditions will be executed before the sun sets today. The consequences were swift, absolute, and unyielding. Before the business day ended, Chloe Miller's employment with Horizon Air was officially terminated. Gavin Ross was stripped of his supervisor status, demoted to a ground baggage handling role, and barred from supervisory promotion. Captain Thomas Wright was removed from active flight duty, pending mandatory retraining on passenger interaction and objective decision-making. Furthermore, Horizon Air completely revamped its internal complaint system, removing staff ability to dismiss customer reports without third-party verification. The 4 black passengers whose complaints had been previously buried were contacted personally by corporate leadership, receiving formal, written apologies and substantial restitution. 3 months later, Julian stepped onto a Horizon Air Boeing 737 departing from Chicago on a crisp, clear autumn afternoon. He wore his familiar Navy suit and carried the same soft leather briefcase. As he reached the aircraft door, a young flight attendant scanned his mobile boarding pass. The scanner chimed a pleasant green light. She looked up, her eyes bright and genuine, offering a warm, respectful smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Hayes," she said naturally. "Seat 2D is right on your right." There was no pause. There was no second check. There was no hidden question lingering beneath her politeness. She did not know he was a board member. She did not know he was a CEO. She simply saw a human being holding a valid ticket, and she treated him with dignity. Julian settled into seat 2D, placing his briefcase overhead. Moments later, the flight attendant brought him a hot, steaming porcelain cup of Earl Grey tea with a fresh slice of lemon, resting on a clean coaster. Julian ran his thumb gently over the warm rim of the cup, looking out the window as the aircraft lifted into the bright blue sky. He felt no anger, no bitterness, and no desire for triumph. He felt only a deep, abiding peace. He had not fought this battle because he possessed power, wealth, or an executive title. He had fought it so that the next traveler stepping onto that airplane, a student, a worker, a mother, or a child, would never need a title just to be treated with respect. If this story inspired you and reminded you of the power of standing up for truth, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, courage, and human dignity. Which moment touched your heart the most? Let us know in the comments below.